All right, good morning, everybody. It's time to get started. Welcome to the December 2nd, 2024 Grants Pass City Council Workshop. And we are going to get started this morning talking about our new water treatment plant.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So I've got a pretty hefty presentation for you today. We sent it out to you on Wednesday, very few minor changes between then and now, but I did want to kind of walk through. We're not asking for any decisions today, but kind of direction on when to bring back the next major decision and which level of decision do you want us to bring back. So our subject and summary is discussion of project status, current and estimated future costs, secured and unsecured financing, and potential next steps. And this supports the council goal of efficiency and effectiveness and infrastructure. So stepping back a little bit, in March of 2023, the city received the 30% design documents and cost estimates for the replacement water treatment plant. And at that time, we brought them to you. We were quite a bit out of budget. Staff began a very extensive review of both plans and associated costs. At that time, the base costs were about $117 million, with an additional $15 million estimated in FEMA required resiliency upgrades, additional $6 million in contingency inspections, owner's rep services, with a total project cost of thinking about $138 million. Due to that project cost, a very extensive value engineering session was held on April 6th and 7th of that year to look at the project with an eye on improving project efficiency as well as reducing costs. The VE target at that time was to reduce the base price from $117 million to $82.5 million. The project team was able to make very strategic reductions without compromising the ability of staff to cost effectively operate and expand the plant in the future. So as you recall, we reported to you that our initial estimates placed those reductions at roughly $12.6 million, which was well short of our $82.5 million target. But further development identified those VE items netted us about $14.6 million in savings, which reduced that base cost from 117 down to the $102.8 million. So we did a pretty good job of reducing the cost. And that brought our cost to the $123.8 million, which is the number that we've been talking about now for about the last year. That included anticipated modifications to the facilities, the existing facilities, meaning the existing plant and the intake structure, as well as complying with all of the BRIC grant requirements. So where are we today? We've removed the chemical building. As you recall, the initial design had a campus layout. We had multiple buildings, chemicals and chemical feed in one building, all the primary plant processes in the second building. There is now only one primary structure, and in that primary structure is both the chemicals and chemical feed and primary operations area. We reduced redundancy in some of the systems, but none of the critical systems. We reduced the clear well size from 1.3 to 1.0 million gallons. We removed most architectural features on the building, including awnings, translucent panels. We removed one membrane rack and clean-in-place system. We reduced and eliminated, quite frankly, most of the pond automation. That's where the solids will be processed. The valves in that were all going to be automated, but we're going to rely on staff opening and closing those valves. We changed pipeline materials to reflect both their duty and the market conditions. So what pipe is going to be the most inexpensive and which pipe is the most effective for the pressure range or the use in the site. We created a compact, much more compact and more efficient site layout. This reduced the overall investment in on-site piping. So by not spreading everything out, we've reduced the piping in between all the buildings. We realigned the finished water connections, which actually shortened and improved that. We also realigned the electrical service routing and connections following the raw water pipeline, so that helps to reduce the amount of trenching because we're not double trenching. So these changes have resulted in a plant design that is both compact efficiency and redundancy to meet today's demand. So what does that mean? We are fully redundant for today's peak flow, which is about 15 million gallons per day. We are able to produce up to 22.5 million gallons per day peak through the plant, and we can easily vary up with a couple of additions of pumps and some additional equipment, become fully redundant at 22.5 MGD, which was the project goal. A couple of views, these probably show it better in your printout of the layout of the plant and showing you how compact and efficient the design is. Looking at the chemical feed area, you can see where we have kept our clean in place system, and then all of the chemical pumps are all the way around one side. Chemical storage is actually outside the building to the north. A look at the operations area. It is very compact again, and this is actually the operations and where the operators will work on maintenance, all their paperwork, everything is in one office instead of creating multiple smaller offices. And then looking at the lab, again, compact, very well laid out, able for everybody to do their work in a very efficient manner. So the 90% design is complete. It's been reviewed and the comments have been incorporated. The plans have been submitted to the Oregon Health Authority Drinking Water Program, and we have received conditional approval for the project. So what that means is that they say you can build the plant now. They approve of the design. The reason they only grant conditional approval is they grant their final approval based on the as-builds and the proof that the plant meets all drinking water quality parameters. So that's after it's constructed. So next, we're ready. We're getting ready to go, and we're moving closer down the field. We need to do one of 3 or 4 things. We need to execute several smaller contracts to facilitate the project, and that would include installation of temporary and permanent power, construction oversight inspection and special inspection services, pre-engineered metal building, PEMB, primary switchgear, and generator. And we're going to talk more in detail on each one of those. Or we can consideration of the GMP as it stands today. We have, I'll be presenting to you in a little bit, what the guaranteed maximum price is for the project as it stands today. And secure the last final pieces of financing. And I have quite a few slides on where we are at with the financing. And then the last thing, of course, is to break ground, hopefully this late spring. So looking at the temporary, or at some of the smaller contracts that we could let early, and this might be something that council wants to consider. Installation of temporary electrical services required to get the project going. We cannot get started on that site. There is no power on the site. We have to get a temporary electrical service to the site. It is not a small electrical service because they have to be able to test a lot of the plant systems off of the temporary system. It's going to be a very large temporary service. So installation of the temporary service is going to cost $57,177 plus any electricity, of course, used for the duration. It will not be installed if this contract were to move forward until after council authorizes the GMP. This simply lets Pacific Power plan, get it in their queue, so that when you do award the GMP, they're ready to go and have acquired all the materials. Permanent power is a little bit different. That's a much more complicated project, and it is going to require Pacific Power several years to complete. The utility-owned infrastructure is going to take months to procure. That means like the transformers and some of the other switches and vaults. It really does make executing this agreement with Pacific Power kind of critical to begin that procurement process. There's extensive work that needs to be completed to the Jones Creek substation, which is where we will receive our power, to ensure reliable delivery of power at J Street. One of the things as we got into it that was a little bit surprising, there is power that runs down J Street It's from a different substation, and it doesn't have the capacity that the plant needs, so they had to go all the way back to Jones Creek to pick up that power. So that's why part of this is going to take so long. If we were to sign that agreement this month, completion and installation of permanent power is not scheduled until spring of 2027. Pacific Power needs that much time. On this project, the total cost to Pacific Power for those improvements is $6.76 million, of which our share of those improvements is $409,000. Our out-of-pocket expenses on this are zero. The way that Pacific Power does that is they amortize that cost over the anticipated life of your connection to the grid, and you pay it back as a monthly fee on your bill. So when construction of the water treatment plant is complete, our bill will be the greater of a monthly charges at 100%, or 80% of our power that we consumed plus $4,914 a month, whichever is greater. And just for reference, our bills currently are running about $23,000 a month, and they average between $19,000 and $36,000 per month. So my guess is it'll always be the monthly charges for power service as opposed to the 80% plus the minimum. The water treatment plant uses a lot of power, and the newer plant will use a little bit more. The power is going to connect to the grid, as we talked about, to the Jones Creek. Well, we're going to pick that up at the corner of M Street and the Parkway, and then it will follow the raw water pipeline essentially all the way up the Parkway and dot into the property in that far southwest corner. So the other contract that we would be considering is services during construction. This would be a contract which would go to our owner's representative, Stantec. That would be to provide continuous on-site construction observation for the duration of the project. This is a little bit above what we normally do as a construction project, so we need somebody who knows construction of large industrial facilities to be on site working alongside the contractor to provide that oversight and reporting back to the city. They will be a key person in the submittal review process, so this project will have thousands, if not tens of thousands of submittals to review for various pieces of equipment all the way down to every stick of rebar. They will be part of that review. They will provide and coordinate special inspections. So on very large industrial projects like this, we have to hire companies to come in and do special inspection, which includes pulling on anchors that have been installed, testing concrete, etc. They will be a key person in change order management, that those will all run between them and the contractor and the city. They also will be a key person in reviewing the pay requests from the contractor and verifying that they have performed the amount of work that they have submitted on their invoices. And also for grant compliance assistance, as we have quite a few grants that are involved. Each one of those grants has slightly different reporting and pay requirements, so keeping in compliance with all of those is going to be a bit of a challenge. So another potential early work contract is the pre-engineered metal building, PEMB we call that. And the reason that this one is so crucial is it is another long lead item, so very long to get, but the submittals are the most important thing. We cannot get a building permit until the building official has signed off on the metal building. So that means we have to get the submittals back and forth between the engineers and the building manufacturer and in conjunction with the building official for him to sign off to award a building permit. So that puts it very early in the what we call the critical path. Without that, we can't start the project. So we need to get that project going early. Generator. This is another really key piece of equipment. Even though we don't need it until after plant startup, the generator has an exceptionally, and I say exceptionally long lead time for submittals and manufacturing and delivery. So once we release the generator to manufacture, so we have a whole process up front of submittals and reviewing, making sure that it is the correct generator, and then we say, great, generator manufacturer, go build that. They will not deliver it for 38 months. That is over 3 years. And so we want to make sure that it's coming before we are done with plant startup. It is a very large generator. It's 1.5 megawatts. They are very involved and specialized. You can't just buy one off the shelf anywhere. But the reason we want to release this contract early is A, it can lock down our pricing, but B, we get that submittal process done so that when council does choose to approve the GMP, we can instantly release it to manufacturing instead of starting the submittal process at that time. It'll shave months off of that delivery schedule. And then the last early work package to consider is the primary switchgear. So this is all of the electrical gear that will drive the plant. Another super long lead time item, both for the submittals, manufacturing, and delivery. Each bucket has to have a submittal that goes along with it. And when I say bucket, that's not, a bucket is one receptacle that drives one piece of machinery in the plant. The electrical gear is a critical portion of the project, and that has to be installed very early in the process so that we can test all of the equipment as we're getting near plant startup. Delivery on the electrical gear is anticipated to be a minimum of 23 months after release to manufacturer, so 2 years, again, after we go through the submittal process. So the early work amendments will amount to about $5 million. Hang on 1 second. There we go. Sorry about that. About $5.5 million in work, but we are only obligating the city to $480,726, which is the cost of the submittals. And doing all the work back and forth with all of those different agencies. That's important to note. Very similar to what we did with the membrane system. As you recall, we asked you to approve that early work contract. And of that $7.1 million, we were only obligating about $500,000, which was the cost of all of the design and the submittal work as we moved the project forward. So the early work will help to lock in the pricing on those few items, and I know that that's not very many items, but the electrical and the generator and the building, we can at least lock those prices down. And then again, it starts that submittal process so that as soon as the GMP is to be approved, we're able to then release those few items to manufacturing. It'll help speed up that process. So the guaranteed maximum price, this is also something that council could consider, and that is approval of the GMP as it stands today. The benefits is that we know what the price is today, and we know that where we stand with the contractor. If we do not approve it now and we wait another 6 months or so as we finalize the financing, or just wait till a little bit later date, the project is going to have to be rebid, and it is anticipated that most pricing at that time will have increased. At least one vendor has already informed the project team of an increase that goes into effect in January. Drawbacks do include that the BRIC funding is not completely secured. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but that means that we could be entering into an agreement that would be difficult to pay for without additional external resources. And I say difficult, our existing rate structure would support the borrowing, but it would require a rate increase at some point, minimum. So we're not recommending that. Sladen conducted bidding in July and August of 2024. The bid date were extended multiple times, well into September. And the reason was we had several local bidders as well as non-local bidders who said, yep, we're going to give you guys a price, we're going to give you a price. And then they never did. It was very disappointing. The bid packages were structured to attract local bidders. However, very few local bidders submitted pricing. Again, we're going to talk about why on the next slide, but it was very disappointing. And so that brings the GMP in with the cost for, and this is design and construction of the replacement water treatment plant at $113,124,314. And that is the GMP as it stands today, including the $14 million that you have already authorized to date. So we talked about no local bidders, and that was despite a lot of outreach to both local and remote contractors. Bids were far and few between, and often those costs far exceeded what our anticipated costs, what we had put in our engineer's estimate. Electrical had been estimated at about $9.1 million, and we received a single bid, one bidder, at $12.4 million. Commercial building contractor was estimated at about 1.2, and we received one bid for 2.3. The pre-stressed tank we had estimated at 2.8, and we received a single bid of 3.8. The PEMB, that's just the building, was estimated at 1.45. We received two bids for that at about 2.07, and there was a $15,000 difference between the two bids. So the bidding market was very competitive where there were multiple bids, but they were still much higher than what we had anticipated. There's several reasons for that. One is a lot of the vendors that we had been getting budget pricing for as the project has been going along had price increases in between when we had been talking to them and when we had finally bid it. All of the contractors told us that Southern Oregon is an expensive market to send their workers to for extended periods of time. So for the building, as an example, that's a very long-term project for a contractor. That means that they're either going to have to try and rent houses or hotels for those people down here for a long time. It's an expensive market. We're so far away from everywhere, but we don't have the local workforce to sustain it. Also, the material escalation during the project was higher than expected. So today, we asked those people for a bid in September for work that's going to be done 2.5 to 3 years in the future. And so they have to use their crystal ball and think of what that material market is going to do, and they put a lot of that into their bid. However, there is good news out of some of this. We did work with, the design build team worked with the bidders, and we did realize an additional $1.6 million in VE savings after bidding on both changing up some of the materials as well as working with them on scheduling, allowing them to maybe put their materials in sooner or pre-buy. So some of the examples of outreach, and we brought several of these to your attention. We did multiple advance notices of upcoming bid opportunities for the local community. We published those in the DJC, which is the Daily Journal of Commerce, the Daily Courier, and on the city's website, and we did that multiple times ahead of the bid opening. We also put the full solicitation of when it was to be done, when we advertised, sorry about that, on July 15th in the DJC, the Daily Courier, and on the city's website. The project was broken into over 58 bid packages, again, trying to make the bid packages fit the markets and to encourage the maximum amount of participation. And then the design build team directly solicited approximately 330 individual subcontractors and suppliers with an emphasis on local contractors. They were calling people up daily going, hey, this bid opportunity's out there, you want to give us a price? So again, project costs, we are currently sitting at $113,124,000. 14,306 of that has already been authorized. As you recall, there was $7.17 million for design and supply of the membrane treatment system, $5.72 million for the balance of phase 1 services, and then approximately about $1.25 million in owner's contingency, which is left in that number, which was from a reduction of scope from H2O. When we eliminated the one membrane unit and the clean in place system, that amounted to about a $1.25 million savings. That's approximately a 1% budget, and so we were just holding that in the budget because we do need to allocate some dollars for contingency. Costs that are not included in that price, so this is the important part. About $3.5 million in potential owner's representative construction oversight and special inspections. We don't have a final number on that, just a preliminary number. And then between $15,000 and $25,000 for intake structure modifications, potential demolition of the entire site, and brick grant compliance costs. So a fair amount that's in there.
Did you say 15,000 and 25,000? Because this says 15 million and 25 million.
If I said 1,000, it was a slip of the tongue. 15 million and 25 million. Sorry. So that brings us to financing. So the numbers are big. The news isn't all great, but it is about where we thought we would be, maybe a little bit higher. We continue to work with our financing partners, Business Oregon and Oregon Emergency Management, to finalize our complex strategy. Our current strategy has over 11 distinct loans, grants, rate revenues, and system development charges. Staff are actively seeking below market interest financing. We identified another $850,000 1% loan 2 weeks ago with Business Oregon, so that's another help towards us. BRIC Phase 1 had been confirmed by Oregon Emergency Management and should be awarded by the end of the calendar year. But we're still waiting on FEMA headquarters to make a final ruling on a policy decision. And that policy decision is that the grant requires that the site be returned to open space, which would mean we have to tear down everything on the site, everything, including all of the asphalt, the intake structure. We're trying to work with them. One of the things that they had early on proposed was we could subdivide the property. By subdividing it, we could minimize the amount that we had to demolish back to open space and try to retain the historic portions of the building. It is definitely an icon. It is a local historic landmark. We would like to keep some of that if possible. We also would like to retain as much of the asphalt as possible. While we can build pervious pavement, it would be very expensive, and we're trying to reduce our costs as much as possible. This is a decision that has to be made at FEMA headquarters in Washington, D.C. The mayor was very kind and signed a letter for us that we have now sent off to the governor and to our representatives. They are all working very hard on our behalf to try and get this policy decision nudged forward. We are trying to be very cautious that we don't nudge too hard. What we have been told in the past is that when people nudge FEMA very hard, you end up potentially going in for a legal review, which can take years if we wait that long. So we are trying to be very cooperative, but they understand the urgency of which we are working under, and they continue to move this forward. And this is a picture of our overall financing that we have identified and nearly secured. As you can see, the 3 with the asterisks are those that are not secured. The reason that I did not put an asterisk next to bonds/WIFIA, however we choose to fund those, and right now it's looking like bonds or private loans are a much better option for us than WIFIA, because those are not, we can initiate those and secure those at any time, so they're pretty much there. BRIC is the unsecured, and the last 2 safe drinking water loans are unsecured, but they will be granted at next cycle, which I want to say is in the spring, from Business Oregon. You can also see the amount that is both in loans and in grants. It's a pretty robust package. And if all of these do materialize, we've funded it at about 60-40 with grants versus loans, and the rest is all in city funds at about 1/3. So we've done a really good job of identifying resources to fund the project. So can we afford it? That's really the key, right? The dollars are there, the monies are there, but can we afford the project? The short answer is with BRIC, absolutely 100%. Our debt service payment would be at about $2.57 million per year, and our coverage ratio would be about 1.93. Now, coverage ratio has to do with the amount of revenues you have in excess of your operating costs as it pertains to your debt service payment. The minimum required is 1.25. So without BRIC, because these are numbers that we knew were going to come up, if we were to borrow the additional resources and realize a corresponding deduct in the overall cost of the project. And so the amount of monies that we would borrow would need to go down because we don't have all of those federal requirements or as many federal requirements to adhere to. The debt service payment would be at 4.76 million, but the coverage ratio drops to 1.13. Now, that would require a rate increase to borrow that much money. And if council was interested, it amounts to about 4 to 5% to the overall rate, or an increase of about $5, I think, on the treatment plant replacement fee. It could be done either way when we ran those numbers. So I don't have a call to action, just some things to consider. We could consider directing staff to bring back the full GMP for the next available council meeting. We could also consider early work packages, which would get the procurement begun on the generator, the switchgear, the electrical service, or delay any decision until all 100% of the funding is secured. And I know that that was a tremendous amount of information. I appreciate it. And with that, questions?
Yeah, council, what questions do you have? Rick?
Thank you, Jason. On the bonds, would the bonds have to go to the public to be voted on?
They're revenue bonds, so they're backed, I believe that they would either be loans or revenue-backed bonds, so because of that, they do not have to be voted.
Okay. And then you stated if we had to go a rate increase of 5%, when would that start?
That is a council-driven decision. It would not need to start until the monies are borrowed, so that's still a couple years out.
Okay. Could you say it wouldn't start until the plant had been fully built, or probably before that?
It would have to be probably ahead of borrowing enough money that that coverage ratio dropped below that number, Councilor.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Joel?
Good presentation, Jason. Thank you. So those options you have in the call, no call to action, but the alternatives, those first two options, I assume, are not mutually exclusive.
Well, if you were to do number one, it makes number two kind of moot. So if we approved the full GMP, we could start on all of those other things tomorrow.
Okay. So,
but if we're not going to approve the GMP, we could consider those early work packages, which would kickstart those very, very long lead time items.
sure, which would save us money also.
Hopefully, yeah, and lock down the pricing on those items as well.
So if for some reason we did not get the funding and we approved the GMP, at this point in time, can we go back and revisit that?
So at that juncture, we would probably want to look at additional funding. We know we have to build the treatment plant, right? So we need to find a way to fund that. We're not going to get lower pricing as we move forward in time. We've seen that since the beginning of the project, that inflation is eating into this project pretty dramatically. What we would have to do is identify additional lower interest resources or additional grants to supplement that so that we didn't have to implement a rate increase. And I think what you're saying is, could we revisit it, take it back? That would be difficult. So you probably wouldn't want to approve the GMP without committing to moving the project forward.
Okay, then under the BRIC policy concerns,
Yep.
the intake and the electrical gear and not necessarily the pavement, are we still using the same intake or are we rebuilding the intake?
No, we're using the same intake.
So it seems like that should be a no-brainer to the people back in DC.
Yes.
Okay.
We,
Part of the new design.
yeah, it was very frustrating. We had a very frustrating meeting with FEMA and OEM. And part of it is a disconnect between understanding how water treatment works. Part of it is a disconnect where they're very much looking at the policy with policy blinders on and they can't see outside of that. Yes, it should be a very easy decision. That structure has to stay there, right? I mean, it's not even an option.
Well, it seems to me like if it's part of the new design, then it's not up for grabs.
Correct. The grant, though, says we have to restore the site back to original open space.
Yeah.
And that's what they're kind of,
Regardless of the design for the new plant.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Regardless of the design for the new plant.
Regardless, because the monies are part of the overall project, but at the new site, it doesn't really come into play.
Yeah, I know you're not the decision maker on that. I just was wondering. Okay, so then my last question was Pacific Power. They're going to put it on our bill rather than us pay all up front. Excuse me. With that, do they charge us interest?
No.
No? Okay, well, that's cool. Okay. Thank you.
Valerie?
Okay, I'm going through clarification partly of what Joel said. So GMP, if we lock it in now, then no prices can go up from that point forward. And you're saying that January is kind of when some of the vendors have said that things will go up. You've heard from vendors, right? So you're saying that
They could.
you don't know that for sure. But
We don't.
yeah, I know.
One
It's a
vendor
crapshoot.
has definitely notified them. My guess is you're going to see several others increase pricing as we move forward in time. It just is
What it is.
inevitable.
Okay, and so then I have another question about the intake structure, because obviously you need the intake structure to run the plant. So where is that money coming from?
So that's part of that $15 to $25 million that I've identified
Okay.
in there.
Okay, so it's included in that price?
It's
Yes, no,
included in
no.
what's not included. Can I
Yeah, clarify that. Yeah,
So let's back up just a little bit.
Okay.
So the price that we've identified as $113 million would be $15 to $25 million more with the intake structure work. We can't put a number to it until FEMA and Oregon Emergency Management clearly tells us, here's what you have to do to the site. We are starting the design work now because the only one thing they have said is that anything we build on the site has to be 1 foot above the base flood elevation. So we can at least start the design work on the intake structure. That'll help drive it forward. But without knowing all of the additional costs that go with that, how much of the structures have to be torn down, how much has to go back to grass, how much asphalt has to come down, pervious pavement, we can't have a firm number.
Does that have anything to do with the FEMA thing that we're talking about? Will that affect, because FEMA's got some new regulations coming down, and that's what we're
No,
talking
it's
about.
unrelated to that.
It's unrelated to that, totally. Okay. All right, thank you.
Dwayne and then DJ?
Yeah, I just got a couple questions. You said there's no call to action, but you gave us several items that had to be done or 2 to 3 years out, and then that would put us at 2028 finish time. Should we make some kind of call to action to that, or, I'm a little confused.
Ideally, there's just no time frame to it, Counselor. Ideally, you would say, bring back all the early work amendments at the next meeting, which would be in January, I believe, because we can't make the next meeting, which would be this week. And we can at least get some of these things in the queue and in the pipeline. That would be ideal. Or if you're feeling a little bit more confident, we could bring back the full GMP and get that approved, which effectively does that others.
All right, and then my next question is, you said that a letter went out to, from the mayor, and who did that letter go to?
It went to the governor, and it went to Mr. Wyden, Mr. Merkley, and Mr. Bentz. And we heard back from Mr. Merkley's office. They've been very active, as well as the governor's office.
Okay, thank you.
DJ?
Sure. Adding to that inquiry, just to be redundant, I think, at this point, but the things that we can do, temporary permanent power, construction oversight, pre-engineered metal building, et cetera, we can get the ball rolling on those things without getting the guaranteed maximum price and also not jeopardizing our ability to get the BRIC grant. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions? Joel?
So Jason, one of the things I'm a little vague on, what is the purpose of the guaranteed maximum price? Why are we doing that?
So the guaranteed maximum price, that part of the delivery method that we've chosen is a progressive design build. And that is where the contractor and the designer are a single entity. Out of that, they give you, the council, a guaranteed maximum price, and we accept that guaranteed maximum price, and they go and build the water plant for that price. It is essentially, if we go out with a solicitation and we get bids back and we award to the single lowest bidder, that's just how this contracting mechanism works.
So if I heard you correctly, the contractor sets the guaranteed maximum price, not the council.
The contractor sets it, you approve it, correct. You can negotiate, and we have negotiated a lot, hence 1.6 million on the cost and some of the other items, as far as, well, no, we don't believe that we should have to pay for that. That should come out of your pot of money. We negotiate almost weekly. You can ask Wayne. It's been a very, it's been a good project, but it also has had its moments
Yeah,
where
it's
things are
arduous.
tense.
So what are the advantages then of us setting the guaranteed maximum price at this point in time if the contractor's going to give it to us? And
So we
what
would-
are the disadvantages?
So the potential disadvantage is we don't accept this guaranteed maximum price. And 6 or 8 months, when we finally have secured all of the other funding and everything is in place, and we then bring back, we have to go out and rebid all of this work, it's possible that that GMP is higher. The advantage is it lets the contractor get started today on all of those early work things that we were talking about. Those kind of become moot. And he can lock down the pricing with the contractors that he has.
Okay, so if I understood you correctly, if we set the guaranteed maximum price at our next meeting or in January, then what it does, it potentially lowers the cost of, or prevents increases in cost on items already under contract.
It would minimize increases, absolutely.
Okay. Okay. So then the other question I had is, okay, if the guaranteed maximum price, if no contractor says they can meet it,
Can you say that again? I didn't quite catch that.
so if no contractor says they can meet the guaranteed maximum price, I mean, that's an economic fact. How do we deal with that?
So the contractor has given us the guaranteed maximum price. He guarantees to us that he can build the treatment plant for that price based on the bids that he has received from the vendors. So in all, the way that works is the contractor is our general contractor. He has gone out and got all the bids from all of the different trades to build the water treatment plant and says, okay, that means that they're going to cost me X amount of dollars. City, it's going to cost you Y amount of dollars. So for the number that's identified, the 113, they can build it, except for the intake structure. That didn't quite get to your question, did it?
Well, I was just wondering, is there a scenario where we set the guaranteed maximum price and it goes above that anyway?
Yes. I think if I get this wrong, correct me again.
Okay.
There could be a change order midstream. So say one of the vendors comes back and they have a 200% price increase and they're just not going to sell a product to the contractor.
Sure.
We may have to go try to find a product alternate or come back and say, we have to execute a change order because this work is costing more. Yes, there is a chance that the work could go up. But the contractor has built a lot of that risk into that price on their side because it's a guaranteed maximum price. But it doesn't forestall every change order.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Mayor and Council.
No.
Very much appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you, Jason. All right, Council, where do you want to go with this? DJ?
I say we proceed with the things that we can and hope we get the BRIC grant in the future to nail down the guaranteed maximum price.
Rob?
Could you repeat that, DJ?
Sure. Do the execute the smaller contracts to facilitate the project, like temporary power, generator, those kind of different things. Do the things that we can do at this point that we have control over
Right.
in anticipation of getting BRIC approval and nailing down the guaranteed maximum price.
Yeah, I don't see why we wouldn't just approve the GMP, which takes care of all that. If I understood from today's presentation, worst case situation, if we don't get the BRIC grant, at some point in the future, there could be a 5% rate increase. We either get the BRIC grant with hopefully the increases that were built in 2017 or 16 or whatever, and the BRIC grant, or no BRIC grant, and then we have to, at some future council has to raise rates. I'm going to assume that the will is here to move forward with a water treatment plan, otherwise we wouldn't have gone 9 years into it. So to do the GMP now is best case, no additional fees, rate increases. Worst case could be a 5% rate increase. But I don't see any reason not to just go with the GMP, and that takes care of all the smaller stuff that we would be doing piecemeal. But I believe we're moving forward with it. Best case, cost us nothing more. Worst case is a 5% increase. To me, I would go forward with the GMP.
Go ahead, DJ.
Sure, I have a question about that, and I appreciate your logic there. Would a pursuit of the GMP at this point jeopardize our ability for the BRIC grant in any way? Maybe it's high-handed or heavy-handed or anything
Not at
like
all. No, the only thing that really could jeopardize the BRIC grant is the policy decision, which I think we will find that middle ground for them. It just means we may have to tear down more of the building than what we were hoping, or we don't, and we go dig. We cannot start construction until that is secured. That was the one thing that they have stressed over and over and over. So no, they would not jeopardize the BRIC grant.
Valerie, I tend to agree with Rob. This has been a long project and a long haul. I don't see turning back now. I don't. And so at this point in time, as Rob said, the reality of it is that, yes, the worst case scenario is we didn't get the BRIC grant and we might have to raise the rent, raise the rates. That wouldn't be automatic, and there would probably be time that we could also go out to try to get more grants or whatever. So, the reality of it is we need a new water treatment plan, and this was built in 1930. I mean, there's just all sorts of reasons that I've been through the last 9 years, going with this, and even having a lot of flack from my husband. But I believe seriously that this was started in 2011, and we just can't go back. So I would agree with Rob that we just need to move forward with the GMP.
Dwayne and then Vanessa.
Yeah, I would agree that, 2 years ago, I was coming into office here and I sat in that room over there and I said, why aren't we buying supplies yet? And the price is going to go up. And here we are 2 years later, and the price has gone up. We could have saved millions of dollars, but so every time we stall on buying some of this stuff or ordering it that needs to happen, it's just going to go up millions of dollars, and especially things are specialty items. So I say we start ordering them so we have them on the ground in 3 years from now. Some of them are 3 years out. So we have to have a water. I mean, the whole city needs water, and we know this is something that has to happen. Do we like spending this much money? No, but we don't really have a choice. At some point, we're not going to have any water, so we should start doing smarter things here. Thank you.
Vanessa.
I also agree that we should move forward today on the GMP. The cost savings that has been brought forward from 138 down to 113, it feels like a great deal. And also, as stated previously, cost of everything keeps going up. I'm also concerned that into the next year, that with the call for tariffs, that a lot of these goods will need to be imported. So I think that there is a potential for a huge cost savings here if we can lock this in today. Or not today, but you know what I mean, move forward on this as soon as possible.
DJ.
Sure, another question. This has been distilled down to simply, if we adopt the GMP, then there will be a marginal rate increase of approximately $5. Is it just that simple at this point? It just feels like it's going to be a little bit more complicated, and the pitfalls could be more numerous than that. And I'm just trying to be cautious here in this answer.
As am I, Counselor. I don't think necessarily approving the GMP guarantees you a rate increase, because again, if BRIC comes through, there is no need for the rate increase in any way, shape, or form. As we move farther forward in time, we will be keeping council appraised of if a rate increase is going to be required and when it is, because it will be, we can't secure the final financing if we were to borrow that amount until the rate increase is approved by council. So it wouldn't be like, okay, we approved the GMP and oh, by the way, here's your rate increase proposal. That would come much later. Correct me if I'm wrong, JC.
No, the only thing that I would just add is the future rate increase is the worst case scenario, right? So you are making a policy decision based on a spectrum of information. So based on the information we have right now, we're giving you the best possible scenario and also the worst possible scenario, which is a potential making a policy decision that could lead to a rate increase.
And then on the other side of that, and I know this is asking to look into the crystal ball, the other side of that spectrum is we get the BRIC grant and we won't experience a rate increase. Are those confidence levels equal?
So if you're asking me if we get the BRIC grant, am I confident that there will not be a rate increase to support the project? 100%.
Okay, yes, that's essentially what I was asking.
Yeah, are you going to need one out towards the end of the whole debt service window, 25, 30 years out? Probably, but to support the project, no, we're looking really good with the BRIC financing, really, really strong.
Yeah, I would only add just a slightly different answer, but the same thing. The current rate structure looks like it can hold the current capacity for the current construction. There could be a need in the future, depending on what other projects come up that are rate increase. But based on the estimations of the financials and how they look right now, it doesn't look like we would need a current rate increase or even go down a rate study.
Brian.
Apologies for being late. Did you already touch on the likelihood of us getting the BRIC grant?
Yeah. Sorry about that. Yes, OEM has said they've awarded us phase 1. We don't have anything on paper yet. They believe it's moving forward. We're really just kind of in this, Washington, D.C. needs to make a policy decision to drive the thing forward. But OEM and the FEMA Region 10 folks that we met with, even though it was a discouraging meeting, are all committed to ensuring that Grants Pass gets this money. So pretty high likelihood. Counselor?
So when you say a policy decision needs to be made in Washington, can you speak to that?
Yeah. So it involves that the grant requires mitigation. And what we're doing is we're mitigating potential flood hazard. They want the entire site to go back to green space. We're just negotiating back and forth on how much of that needs to be restored to green space.
Okay, very good, thank you. And then on the project cost slide, it talks about the project being $113 million, it's slide 27. But it does have their underlined costs for design and construction is $113 million, so I know that's not the total cost of the project. I mean, we've bought land, there's other costs involved.
Yeah, so on slide, forward two more, slide 30, we're anticipating potentially between 15 and 25 for the intake or the existing site work, depending on how much FEMA requires us to do. In addition to up to probably about $3.5 million in additional owner's rep services during construction. but that covers everything except for property acquisition. That was not included in that number.
Okay, and how much, do you recall, was property acquisition to the nearest million?
5+, does that sound correct, Aaron? I want to say 5+.
Okay, so just rolling all that up, 113 plus 5 plus 3.5 plus on the low end 15. You know, I mean, what is that, 138, give or take?
Yeah, it's right in that range.
Okay, and then up to 148 if the BRIC grant makes us do a lot more. Okay,
Correct.
okay, thank you.
All right, it sounded like the overall consensus of the council was to consider going forward with the full GMP and adopting that at the next meeting, and that you would also be able to get started on ordering some of those long-term packages. Is there anything further on that topic? No? All right, thank you, Jason, for the little bit less than a fire hose of information there this time, right? Okay, Navigation Shelter Services Grant, and Aaron's coming up for that one.
All right, good afternoon, Mayor, Council. I'm here to introduce the discussion for you on shelter service funding, specific to Mint's proposals and discussions that we've been having with Mint and their services they provide to the community. This does support your goal of leadership by assuring that we have appropriate compliance with time, place, and manner regulations associated with state law. Just some slight background on where we are today. Mint has requested council support in securing current service site location, which is at Parker Place. The lease ends in February of 2025, and so there is some urgency associated with Mint in recognizing and knowing where they're going to be providing their services in the future. Mint also provided the city with a document partnership for low barrier shelter and urban campground initiative proposal. That was if they were operating in another site that provided an opportunity for them to provide a whole gamut of services, and what that would look like if they were to do so, with some estimated costs associated with those services to be provided, and the city support not necessarily defined, but in for sure securing a location was something that was discussed. Since those two proposals sort of were brought to council, council has had some discussions and expressed some interest in discussing Mint's request and proposal specifically to Parker Place today. It was mentioned, so I'm going to provide some additional information with regards to that. So council has expressed interest in seeing what they could do to provide some resources to Mint to secure their current site location. There's really basically two ways to do that. One is we could do it through a grant program, which I'll provide you some additional details, and or the city could go in and try and purchase the property themselves also and do some kind of lease back program. In order if we're going to do a grant program, in order for the grant program to work and to be exempt from public contracting, the city must provide funds in the form of a grant as defined in ORS 279. We would need to define the maximum amount of funds, the specific location to be purchased, which we are aware of if we're talking about Parker Place. You may want to look at, in a grant program of some sort, minimum performance standards, kind of number of beds, number of staff, frequency of operations, etc. Deadline for being fully operational, and then some limitations of use of funds with regards to the acquisition. It would be used for acquisition and potentially not for operations or maintenance or other capital improvements. Those are all things that need to be discussed further with council. Once we had council direction, if you're going to go in that route, we would be able to draft an agreement or a grant agreement program. Consideration also when it comes to a grant award is to look at some restrictive covenants to make sure it's recorded on the property, because these are public dollars going to a nonprofit. So you may want to look at if you're going to do a grant program, to include in the grant program some restrictions on transfer of operations or ownership of that property. That Mint should not be able to sell the property and profit from the gift of public monies without prior authorization to the city. Restrictions on operations, it must continue to be used as a homeless shelter according to minimum performance metrics set forward in the grant agreement. So you'd be looking at some of those items, along with additional things that you might want to consider in a grant program, just for your discussion. Potential for the city to reclaim the property after a certain duration if the use as a homeless shelter is no longer viable or in the city's best interest. Reclamation of the property should not be at the charge of the city. And then default clause to be include a reasonable time to cure the default. If something was in default and it was not cured in a reasonable time, that the property would then revert back to the city. When it comes to timelines, I put up 2 timelines here, and again, this is best case, and I underlined best case. This is if everything aligned perfect and it was just absolutely amazing. I would not normally put dates this quick, but I'm trying to give you best case. It's not a guarantee. Please do not look at these numbers and say it's a guarantee. There are so many factors associated with a grant program or the procurement of property that does not make these set in stone. However, from a grant program, if the council wanted to establish a grant program for Mint and or others to apply for services like we were discussing, you can provide that direction through a resolution on December 4th. If you provide me direction today, we can establish a resolution for you to approve a grant program. At that point, you could also approve the authority for us to publish a grant program and provide authority for the city manager to award the grant to help expedite the time frame. So we wouldn't have to go back and review the grant application and go through a council process. You could provide me the authority to do both of those things. We could have the grant application due the 13th. It's only a week after we would publish it. But again, these are just timelines we're trying to get done before the end of the year for council's consideration. And then December 20th, we could do a potential grant award based on when the application was turned in. Grant funds could be distributed at some point after December 20th when all the grant requirements were met. If the city was wanting to purchase the property, provided you some timelines, we'd be looking at December 5th through the 13th for some due diligence and inspections associated with the property. 16th through the 23rd, negotiate terms with the seller and finalize purchase price. December 23rd through the 31st, we would try to open escrow with final approvals and closing sometime in January or sometime in the first of the year. Some caveats to the grant agreement award and potential timelines. Right now, to this date, we have an unknown dollar amount. When it comes to property purchase, that does create some pause when you're looking at the discussion of what the dollar amount would be. Needs to define performance metrics, I think, needs to be part of that grant agreement. Procurement due diligence, a purchase and sale agreement, identify remedies if failure to perform. I mentioned those earlier in some previous slides, but those are some things that would probably need to be in the grant agreement if we move forward with the grant. Due to the nature of the grant being purchase of property, it is recommended that no dollar amounts associated with the purchase of the property be discussed in open session. If council is interested in doing a grant and they want to have a discussion on the finances of the grant, it's recommended and it's allowed for you to go into executive session to talk about the lease or purchase of real property. We looked at what type of funding sources would be available for council if they wanted to either purchase property or if they wanted to provide a grant program. And there's a list of a few items for you to consider in looking at this. We have about $100,000 in community development block grant dollars, which could be used for this type of program, a shelter program service. There would require some reallocation of some of the funds in our consolidated plan that we have, but it is a viable use of some of those dollars up to around $100,000. We do have general fund contingency. That would be at council's discretion at the maximum amount that you'd like to use. It would come from general fund, and the caveat there is depending on the amount that would come from general fund, you may look at drawing down the general fund's fund balance and maybe outside the parameters of your current funding balance that you have. We have LB 000, approximately $400,000 would be available there. These funds are earmarked to help with the City Hall roof replacement. So if we did utilize those funds, we need to look at some other potential resources to either fund the City Hall replacement, or we would just do a larger internal loan fund if those funds were used. We have $1.2 million in reallocation of pool funding that you could reallocate to this. This was mentioned at one of our previous council meetings. If you did do that and you wanted to continue the pool program, we would need to replace those funds or replace the scope of work with regards to the pool program. We also have the same thing with the same items here, reallocation of public safety repeater. We have communication deficiencies within our system, and some of the ARPA dollars we're going to reallocate for public safety repeater program, and that's $200,000 that you have for that. So your call to action after this presentation here is for you to have a discussion to provide direction to include a resolution to adopt a grant program for shelter services at the December 4th meeting. You could schedule an executive session to discuss property purchase or lease at the December 4th council meeting if you so desire. You can move to additional workshops. You can provide direction for me to move forward with the purchase of the property, for the city to acquire that property for shelter services and lease, and come up with a contract partnership with Mint, or you could take no action at this time. And with that, Mayor, I turn it over to you.
Thanks, Aaron.
Oh, we also have representatives of Mint here to answer any questions with regards to service levels or any parameters associated with what they would need.
All right, thank you. Dwayne?
Thank you. I have quite a few questions. We'll start with this one. You kept saying, why are you putting dates in? And you said we have to get this done by the end of the year. Is someone pushing you to get this done by the end of the year, or is there a hurry to do this by the end of the year?
It was my understanding in the discussions that we had at the previous workshops that this council, as they sit, were interested in trying to provide some resources to Mint before the end of the calendar year. Okay. That was the reason why I included those dates, was based on council direction from previous council meetings.
Has the city bought property for NGOs before?
For what?
Has the city bought property for NGOs before? Have we ever done that before?
NGOs?
Yeah, nonprofits.
Non-governmental organizations.
Yeah.
Yes, the On-Track.
I'm trying to think.
We did not buy that building for On-Track, so that's
On-Track
false.
On-Track wasn't for
infrastructure.
property, it was for infrastructure.
Yes, it was.
It's not coming to mind right now of a time when we did that.
Okay. Has there been an operational plan submitted by Mint?
No, but that could be something council could discuss. I think that would be a good due diligence thing on council's part, to ask for an operational plan, and that could be part of the grant award program and process. It could be a question that could be asked through that if you so desire.
And has there been appraisal of the Parkhurst buildings yet?
No, there is not. That would require council approval.
Okay.
I need direction to know that that's the direction we're going, and I would do that appraisal process.
Would there be any code changes for a shelter to go in that?
It's zone general commercial, and a number of years ago, council did change the code to allow for shelter services in general commercial. So there isn't any anticipated, I believe, code changes necessary for them to provide the services that they're asking.
And then my last question is, we gave Mint pallet shelters in April because of their request. Have they used those or done anything with them yet?
Well, the pallet shelters were never actually city-owned. I believe the pallet shelters were another nonprofits, and so we were just storing them, so we didn't actually give them any pallet shelters.
But we passed the stuff, and so they never used anything, or I thought they were requesting back in April for pallet shelters or something.
Well, again, we don't own pallet shelters. We were storing some pallet shelters. That's what I can tell you. If that might be a question of Mint.
Okay, thank you.
Does anybody else have questions? Val?
Yeah, and I guess it's my inference that we need to go into, because I personally feel that we need to have an assessment of the property, because I want to know what is involved in that $750,000. Does that include both of the buildings and the property? I mean, I'm unclear of those things, and I think those things need to be clarified before I can actually make a decision, as the due diligence for the city needs to happen. I personally am in favor of doing something, and I've been part of that. I think that was the direction, is that we wanted to, it was our understanding, and I feel strongly that I know the new council does want to close J Street, and I understand, I want to close J Street too, but I feel in order for that to be closed, there needs to be something in place. And so that is why I believe we went forward with trying to get something worked out. But I also agree that we need to have more information about the building before we can do that. And I guess my question to you is, do we need to have another executive session to be able to talk about that discussion and the value and all that? And can that happen soon, or would it have to be next year? So that's the question, and the question about the timing. That's the elephant in the room.
Sure. I'll try to address some of those. So the first question, can we have an executive session before the end of the year? Yes, you can have an executive session Wednesday
night.
if you'd like. We just need to provide the 24 hours notice. So if you provided direction to me today at the workshop that you'd like to have an executive session to talk about the purchase of real property, that would comply with state law, and we can make that happen. The due diligence that you're talking about with regards to the property, I think that, again, that's very astute of council to have that consideration. We're not sure if we're going to be a partner in that, in the purchasing of the property, whether the city doing it or the grant program, that there is due diligence associated with that. That could be part of the grant program, but it would need to be potentially discussed by council also. I think having council having a good idea of not only the purchase of the property, the buildings, the intent of the buildings, what kind of improvements are needed to the buildings, and the cost associated with those improvements, the timing frame of when those improvements would be online and when the services would be online, are all part of the due diligence council. Probably you're asking good questions now. I don't have those answers because I haven't done an inspection on the building and the property, and I don't have the answers on how quick Mint might be able to do turnaround on those things. So those are some of the questions that may need to be answered by Mint and or by additional discovery after we do some of our due diligence.
Okay. Another question I had is, we mentioned the fact that that property is in the urban renewal
Yes.
boundary, and that there is money having to do with transitional housing that can be utilized as well. Am I correct?
There's about 3 categories in the urban renewal agency that provides for the potential of utilization of urban renewal dollars. I believe that there was a memo we provided to council that talked about that. There's 3 areas. One is the number 9 in our plan, which is building rehab program. We have $2 million there to serve over a 30-year time period. This is under building rehab. The staff's interpretation of Project 9 is that the funds are reserved really for physical improvements to real property, not intended for property acquisition. So it could help with maybe some building deficiencies associated with that, so they can utilize renewal dollars there. There's 2 other items. Number 13, which is undeveloped land. We have about $6 million there to be spent over the 30-year period. With regards to undeveloped land, staff's interpretation of Project 13 is that these funds are dedicated for public infrastructure improvements, those horizontal improvements that are underground, those utilities, et cetera. So if there's deficiencies in that property, they could utilize number 13. And then number 16 is housing development program. We have $10 million in the plan over a 30-year period. Staff's interpretation of Project 16 is that these funds are intended for permanent affordable housing projects, not emergency shelters, such as what we're talking about. If council would want to change that, we would need to do likely a plan amendment to allow for those funds to be utilized for the purchase of property.
I guess I question a little bit because it's on the housing number 16, housing units, Grants Pass prioritizing development of transitional. I guess pallet shelters in a sense are transitional because you are getting people into a transition to be able to move them otherwise and low, including pre-development assistance, completion of off-site improvements, land purchase. So there are some things in there that I think specifically call out that could be used without having to do an amendment.
Staff's recommendation is, it looks like, based on our definition of what we see, is that a plan amendment may be needed if you want to use that for purchase of property for this service. We can get additional legal counsel advice on that, but that's our interpretation.
We do have representatives from Mint here, so let's get them up to answer a couple of the questions that have already been asked before we get too deep into this. If you could, please, we have Leah Swanson and Cassie Leach from Mint. Could you start by giving us just an update of the pallet shelters status?
Absolutely, yes. So the pallet shelters, we have space for 20 of them, and currently, right now, we are fixing plumbing. We were actually talking with Mr. Parker today. We have a few plumbing leaks in the back of the navigation center. Once those are fixed, we can dig up the trenches, start the paving, and that's what's slowing us down. We're also, I believe, waiting for permits, or we might have already got them for electrical updates, because we want those homes to have electrical. And so getting the electrical updates in the navigation center done first to accommodate the additional electrical in the back. So those are the two things: fix the plumbing, get the electrical, do the paving, which we have funding for all of the above that I discussed.
And then on the property, have you done an appraisal? I think
Yeah.
we talked about
My
some
board of
things.
directors wouldn't even entertain the thought of purchasing or moving forward without an appropriate appraisal. Originally, the asking price of the owner was higher than what we felt we were comfortable with, and so we did do an appraisal, and we actually sent the official appraisal over to you guys while we heard the discussion, so you guys can take a peek at it. And then just for clarification, we are requesting two properties, right? The Parker property that has the furniture building, the former plant stop that we're using, and the place in the back. And then Bi-Mart is selling their grassy knoll. And we actually contacted the manager as the discussions were happening just to make sure they're still eager to sell and they would love to get rid of it. So they're, and I can forward you guys the asking price for that. We did not do an appraisal on that land, but we did for Mr. Parker's property.
So just so everyone knows, that's the kind of parking, unpaved parking area that's just to the north of the Parker Place building. So it's not part of Bi-Mart's parking lot, but it is owned by Bi-Mart, right?
Correct.
Okay. And then can you tell us the difference between an emergency shelter and transitional housing and how this relates?
As far as like the inclement weather shelter?
Well, it's just the term emergency shelter, is that what you're planning to operate there?
No, I think we're trying to do transitional. The last thing we want to do is have people in our low barrier shelter and stay there. Our goal is to get people in, get them involved in case management, and get them to the right entity to help them move forward, whether it's substance use treatment, mental health treatment, or into a home, because it was a financial barrier, whatever it may be.
Okay. And then in addition to the 20 pallet shelters, what are you planning to do with those two buildings?
So the one building will stay at it as it is, which is a navigation center and an inclement weather shelter for folks, which I know the city needs to have. We did open that this weekend, just FYI. We were open 3 nights, and I know Saturday night we had 85 people come in between 8 and midnight, and 45 stayed the night. So our unhoused friends definitely utilized it. And then the back will be the tiny homes. I'm sorry, what was the question? I got distracted.
Oh, just what you're going to do with the two buildings, because you
Yeah,
have,
so that'll stay exactly how it is, and then the other building will be, congregate living space where folks will have to follow the same rules that they do at the emergency shelter or the pallet homes, identical to Rogue Retreats rules and operational model, and we're looking at 30 to 40 folks there. And then the grassy area, we would love to be a long-term kind of Foundry Village or more pallet homes. But I think for, we desire to partner with the city, and I know the city is looking at closing down J Street, so it'd be really easy for us to turn that into an urban campground that is monitored by Mint and secured. And so that was part of, the thought is we turn that into an urban campground, and then as we evolve the congregate living space and can move folks from the urban campground to there, we would transition the urban campground into more permanent housing units.
does that help answer it? Let's do Joel and then Val.
Yeah, I just have a question, because I've heard, could you clarify one more time, and I know I've heard it, but I keep hearing people saying that you are a low barrier shelter, exactly what that means?
I don't know. There's, if you hang out with one crowd of people, it's really cool to say low barrier shelter. If you hang out with another crowd, it's not. We're just a group of people that want to serve unhoused, and we use the National Alliance to End Homeless as our best practice model. And so we utilize them a lot. We talk to them, we utilize their resources, and then we tap into Sam Engel tremendously. And ultimately, let's be honest, let's not make it hard. Rogue Retreat has a fabulous fabulous model, and we are lucky to have their executive director live in our community. And so our desire is to work smarter and not harder and really just reproduce what Rogue Retreat's doing, because we're not much different than Jackson County, and if that model works there, I think it could work here.
I have another question, and that has to do with PATH. And you've been working with PATH, and PATH has provided volunteers, correct? Moving forward, because I was at a meeting, the last PATH meeting, and one of the things that was mentioned was that when Brian gave his Botello from the Gospel Rescue Mission, he did a great presentation. He talked about how valuable they are for taking young people who need a change in their life and moving forward. But one of the things that he said is that they don't do medical, that if there are people who have medical issues, they do not allow them to go in. Do you allow people with medical conditions to go to the low barrier shelter? Can you?
Absolutely, and even more important than that, you know, their front-end manager, I work with them and help them. If they get someone inappropriate at their facility, we'll take them. At the same time, if I have someone that I think would do really good in their program, I punt them to them. But yeah, we will be taking, you know, folks that have disability. We won't require work, and so, you know, the Gospel Rescue Mission program is amazing, but if you can't work, it's hard. You know, it's just not a program that fits for them. And so one of the things is we aren't requiring work. I mean, they will have to work. They'll be filling out lots of paperwork for disabilities, et cetera, but not the kind of work that the mission does.
Okay, thank you for that.
Joel?
So one of the things that strikes me is you have a business plan, and you gave some of that to us, operating expenses. The city doesn't have a business plan. And those two need to be coordinated. So for example, operating expenses, who's responsible for those 2 years from now, 1 year from now? Do we know? What does the city need for their business plan to make you successful? And what are your plans with that? And you don't need to answer that now, but I just want you to think about it, because before I make a decision, I need to know what that looks like. And not that we're going to put all the feathers on the turkey, but I need to address that.
Absolutely, and I think I can follow up with Mayor, City Council with an email to follow up, but in short, you know, we're not gonna open up a building, have 100 capacity and say, oh my gosh, we can't handle it, we need money. We're gonna open slowly, be thoughtful, make sure we have funding, and if it means for the first 2 years we have to limit capacity to be successful and do what we need to do, that's what we'll do. But yeah, we're not coming to you right now with the anticipation that we'll have additional asks for you moving forward, but we are coming to you and my folks in the back hoping we have a really good partnership moving forward for the betterment of our entire community.
Could I ask one more question?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and you're more familiar with this than I am. There's some people that just don't respond. And they're kind of frustrating, especially if they're in your family or in my family. Do you have limits on stay or whatever so you don't fill up with that category of people? Not to stereotype them, but that's what's happened a little bit down at Rogue Retreat.
It has, and we inherited those people and moved them for Saturdays, and so yeah, we learned very closely with that. I think the tiny homes, that's going to look unique because they'll probably be medical fragile people, and getting them into a safe living environment looks different and takes a bit longer, and coordination with their insurance company, primary care, et cetera. But for the rest of them, no, we want success. Like we really get excited. We moved 4 people into a house this weekend and it made my whole weekend. You know what I mean? Like that's what we look forward to. And ultimately right now, we work closely with our partners. So I know who a lot, like ADAPT's working with, and Options and On Track. And, I've been talking a lot with Crystal at Options saying, hey, when we open up, like, who are the people that we're going to be able, that are almost to the finish line, that we can really get in and get them, housed and get more people in. So no, I'm a nurse, and so I call it constipated, and I do not like constipation. I do not want the shelter full of people that we can't move out. We want to have good throughput and have people coming in and out. I think a lot of it has to come in when at point of entry, right? And so the model that Rogue Retreat has 30 days at a urban campground, you don't have to engage in case management services. But the whole point of that 30 days is for us as outreach workers to build trust and rapport with them. And so that's what we do. And that 30 days is up. I anticipate they will enroll in a case management, but then we set goals. And those goals are definable and they're objective. And we check in with those people every so often. So, all right, your goal is to get into inpatient treatment. Awesome. 2 weeks later, hey, you missed your inpatient assessment appointment. What's going on? You know, we want this to be, and so it's just that constant dialogue and working with them to get to the next step. And sometimes it means, you know, like we had to turn someone away this weekend because their behavior was inappropriate. And it's just what you have to do for the betterment of everybody. You know, we'll welcome them back when they're ready to try something different, but yeah.
Rob.
Yeah, thanks, Cassie. You mentioned that you're currently doing some electrical work and possibly some plumbing work or trenching, and you said you have funding for all that. What are the funding sources for the work that you're doing over there now?
Yeah, so currently right now, the acute plumbing issues, obviously, our landlord takes care of, right? And so that's being taken care of there. And then we got a Four-Way Foundation grant for $10,000 for the paving with a budget, our operating budget, I think, was $17,000. And we ended up having a private donor after reading our grant match that, so we ended up with $20,000 from Four-Way Foundation. Additionally, I think we've gotten near $10,000 in private donations that can be reserved for that, and another funding source for $17,000 that we're working on, and that would be the additional cost of the plumbing and electric.
Thank you. So another question, we haven't really talked in detail about it yet. Maybe 3 years ago, when Rogue Retreat came to a workshop, I think we talked about it then, but a concern that I know a lot of people have is, you know, do you have at a low barrier shelter a lot of hangers-on, a lot of people hanging out outside the fence and so forth, people waiting for their next warm meal that aren't really part of your program, but people who may diminish quality of life in the neighborhood. So what would you, what kind of plan or what kind of vision do you have for keeping those issues from essentially escaping or oozing out of your property, but hanging out around your property looking for handouts without really fulfilling the case management requirements and things like that? Could you speak to that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think when we get to a place that people are living there 24/7 and it's their home, how we operate changes a little. And part of some of the other funding we're looking at, you know, we want to create a perimeter for that place that's safe for the people that live there and also for folks around us, right? And so part of it will be kind of creating a nice fence around it so that way it creates some of that hanging out on the front porch that I think that we see. I think with the inclement weather shelters, it's always going to be a challenge, like getting people off the porch at 9 a.m. this weekend was hard, you know what I mean? And they didn't really have that many places to go. And so that's something that the police department was great. I saw them come out a few times when people, I think it worked okay, but as far as the emergency inclement stuff, I don't know how we're gonna, that's gonna be an ongoing issue with crowds, I think. But ultimately, we wanna have, this place is gonna be people's homes. They'll come and go. And the navigation center will have a sign-in system where people come in and stuff, and so they're gonna have to check in and do things like that. And so it'll be a little bit more structured to be respectful of the people living in the space. Oh, yes.
Yeah. I would say it's also it's always a work in process. So like we had to move the smoking from the back area when fire season was happening because we did not want to start any fires in the grassy area behind the building, and then smoking was on the front porch, and we got kind of comfortable with that. And then we realized we had a bit of an issue, and we've been working on moving it back. So it's an ongoing thing. We do hear the community saying things, and we try to do our best to move around it. But I also just want to keep in mind that like folks who come to our shelter and only want a meal, they might come a month, 3 months in a row and only get a meal, and then that very next day they might engage in services. Sometimes it takes a long time before people get comfortable with us. They've had a lifetime of very bad experiences with systems and organizations, and so just because they're coming for a meal and then hanging out isn't necessarily wasted time or effort or space having them on our porch, but something we definitely want to continue to work around.
Are there other questions right now? No? All right. Was there anything else you wanted to let us know right now?
No, just thank you guys. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Council discussion or questions? Was that a hand, DJ? Go ahead.
Oh, good. Go ahead.
Thank you, Val. It's very general questions on the funding sources identified by staff. LB0, I recall putting funds into LB0 because they were so minuscule that it wasn't sensible to allocate to any. There wasn't appreciable allocations to go into any other LB projects, whether ongoing or related to strategic plan. But it's demonstrated on this graph here, or this table, that it's earmarked for the City Hall roof replacement. Can we speak to the LB0 project a little bit more, please?
Yeah, so that's a kind of a project that hangs out to help with the underages and overages of other projects in LB. It also, per the budget, gave $500,000 to the roof replacement. So part of the word usage, though, that the excess of LB00 was hopeful to help potentially buy down the increase in inflation for the roof replacement and or reduce the interfund loan, because we're going to need to take out an interfund loan for about $700,000 budgetarily from another fund to do the project. As we sit, the last couple of years, we've done very well in interest earnings, which is why that amount is the size at which it is.
Cool. Let's see. So funding for the resting sites currently, is that just coming straight from contingency of general fund? And approximately a percentage hit that the contingency's taken with that allocation. Do you know that? General numbers here. You know, I think we were floating around 30-something%. We went down to 25-ish%. Have you run those numbers? Is it fair for me to ask you this question right now?
We don't know an exact percentage. I can try and figure what that out is.
I'm just trying to get down to simpler numbers rather than dollar figures is all. I don't really expect you to have to answer that question now, but I'm curious. LB 6417 for a public safety repeater. Could we talk about that? I'm just trying to understand these categories a little bit better.
Yeah, thank you for asking the question, Councilor. The repeater project was something we've known for a long time that we want to enhance our capability throughout not just the city but also the county, and we appropriated, you guys approved those dollars so we could build a new tower on Dollar Mountain. We actually miscalculated the amount, and that is way under the amount we will need for that project. So we went out and we applied for Senator Wyden Merkley appropriation dollars in the tune of about $1.3 million. We elevated that cost because we knew it would take several months and or years for it to be approved. So we were looking at the inflationary costs. So having that $200,000 in there could possibly help us if that $1.3 million, if we're fortunate enough to get it, which I think we're still in the running, is actually higher than that number. So hopefully that answered your question.
It does. Thank you.
Okay, Valerie, then Dwayne.
Well, my original question was, I really think that we need to have an executive meeting about the financial part of it, because I do think that's important. But I will also ask about the repeater fund, and that grant has been submitted, but we haven't heard back. Is that correct?
That is correct. It's been submitted, and we did hear back that we're moving forward, so I don't know what that looks like. We're not anticipating any more contact, I think, until the spring timeframe.
Okay. And then I also wanted to ask JC, because I do notice on a monthly basis when we do the amount of interest that we have been earning in our accounts since we made the decision to invest the money over the last 4 years. Could you kind of give us a ballpark money of how much we've talked about and how much interest we have earned in the last 3 years since we've made that decision?
Off the top of my head, I don't know that answer. But I could tell you just about 5 years ago, we were maybe, as a city in total, probably only earning a couple $100,000. Last year, financially, I believe we did close to $5.2 million in interest earnings, which is quite a bit of a change. But conservatively, because we have seen such a swing, budgetarily, I'm not necessarily recommending that each program count on getting $5 million year in and year out, because we are seeing the interest rate go down.
I think we all realize that that's kind of how that goes. You ride with it when it goes up, and then you also prepare that it may not always be there. Currently, when you get the interest, does that interest stay within each department? How does that work? How does the interest work?
Yeah, so that's normally a management decision on how that works. We treat every fund fairly and equally, so it's based on the cash balance of the fund. And so as of right now, I believe water and water capital have a lot of money storing up for the water treatment plant, which we just discussed earlier, which they would get, I believe it's the bulk of the interest or the larger percentage. It's based on percentage though.
But other departments, same thing, basically they get it and it kind of usually goes back into that department?
That is correct. And even though those smaller programs, they do realize on those operational interests. So like the industrial loan fund, that has about $400,000, that does the facade grant program. And so if no money's come in as far as interest, because there is no revenue source for those, they don't necessarily have as a robust program in that fund.
Okay, thank you.
Dwayne.
Yeah, I just have first a clarifying question, because I can't remember all these acronyms half the time. The CDBG fund, is that the one that fixes people with their houses, heating and stuff like that? And is there a reason why we stopped that for some reason to help people this year? Or, yes, we did, where I was told that they were stopped. So is there a reason why we're not doing that? And put it on pause right now or something? Because I was told there was grants being requested for people that had housing, heat needs and stuff like that, and the city was told no right now.
Right. We received, I believe, about 90 applications this year for that program, and we only had enough funding for, much lower than that, I think around 10 to 12. So we are completing this year those projects for the ones that we have funding for. The number of 100,000 that Aaron put up on the screen earlier is a different project within CDBG, so it doesn't take any money away from the housing rehab.
Okay, that was my question. Thank you.
Excuse me, I just want to clarify too, but the housing rehab, when in the next year there will be more money put in there, because they plan to continue that program, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so it was just that this particular year ran out of money, but it is an ongoing program. Thank you.
I do have an answer to your previous question. Approximately $1 million is roughly around a little over 3%.
Joel.
So before I make a decision, if it's up to me, I need that executive session, and the two main things I need to look at are, one, the appraisal, and two, what the budget for operations is and where is it coming from, and what is the city budget associated with that needed to keep things operational. Because we need to not just have a shelter for 6 months based on last year's donations, but we need an ongoing program. And it would be foolhardy on our part not to ask those questions, because otherwise we could be obligating a budget, which maybe we want to anyway, maybe we don't, but we want to do it consciously and not by accident or because we didn't ask the questions going in. So that operational budget is very important, and we need to address that in the executive session, plus the appraisal. Because if we need a city budget, we need to know what that needs to be and where is it coming from year after year after year. So
I just want to answer that because I'm unclear. I don't think that there was an operational budget from the city for the MINT program.
I just want to clarify, you can talk about you can discuss the appraisal, you can discuss property purchase, but the discussion of operational costs and budget is not an executive session item. That would need to be discussed in open session.
Okay, well then we need to have that discussion as well, because I think it's an important discussion for all of us, including the shelter. So,
I just want clarification, because it was my understanding that the purpose of this and my doing and working with Mint was the fact that they were taking over the operational part of it, and they were simply asking for the building so they can continue to get grants and get operational funding without coming to the city. And I guess while we have them here, maybe we should get that clarified since they're here. But that's my understanding, was we had talked about opening up the north end of town, doing something and paying whatever, and paying operational. And at one time, UCAN gave us they said for $3 million, they would, in a 2-year contract, they would operate it. But that was asking for operational. This is not asking for operational. This is simply asking for a one-time.
so what I'm thinking is, as we make the investment, it's not a 1-year investment, it's not a 6-year investment or a 6-month investment. It is a 5-year investment, it's a 10-year investment. And we want to make sure that we ask those questions appropriately in a business plan, both for the nonprofit and for the city, because we don't want surprises down the road because we didn't ask the question.
And it's my understanding that that will be written, that could be written into the contract. Is that something that's talked about at the executive? Because yes, those sorts of contract things, I also believe if that needs to be discussed today, then I would like to discuss it today in terms of the contract moving forward for them having their business plan, us having our, because some of that was discussed today, brought up.
So what you're talking about is all good discussion, but you don't have all of the information at your fingertips at the moment. What you're asking for is more of a business plan, I think, to be submitted based on Parker Place and implementation timelines and budget. I would just ask Mint on their ability to get that information for you and a timeline on when they get that information for you. In the meantime, we could have a discussion on property purchase and how that might go about if we purchase, or if we do a grant or we do it through a grant program or whatever. But all of the business plan, operations, implementation operation, budget, that's just all open session discussion. But I don't know if you're ready to have that discussion today without an actual proposal from Mint on what you're asking for.
Brian.
I think a lot of the things that Joel's talking about can be addressed in the grant agreement without necessarily needing to know every little detail of their plan. We can write things in there to where if they lose funding, the property will revert to the city. So, you know, there are safeties that can be written into that agreement without them having a fully, you know, polished business and implementation plan this week. There are still ways to safeguard the city in that regard. And to Aaron's point, you know, if we're wanting to talk about this on Wednesday, there's some things that we can try to hash out now. Mint is here, we're here, this is a workshop. I would rather, you know, have Aaron put that slide back up there that has some of those things that need to be discussed and discuss them now, so things are a little more streamlined when we get to Wednesday.
Joel.
So one of the things, Brian, when we invest money, we don't invest it just for the next 6 months. That's not an appropriate planning style or appropriate method of what we're doing if we're a professional city organization. And it's not fair to Mint either. And we're not here to, at this point in time, unknowingly obligate future money to keep you going in business a year from now. And what I heard you say, and I don't know what I'm talking about, so you can correct me. You got some individual volunteer donations, but then what about next year? And then what about year 5? Because we want a facility that is sustainable and can continue to serve our members if we're going to invest this kind of money in a facility.
Yes, thank you for the long-term concern, because that is certainly our plan, is to be around for the long term. The really origin of this request is that Mr. Parker would like to retire and he would like to sell that building, and we don't have the funds to buy it right now. We have the funds to continue paying rent, but obviously we could use those funds in a much better way if we could. We are only asking for money from city for the purchase of the building. We plan on continuing to pay for operations out of our grants and private donations and whatever other funding we can continue to attain. Funding is always hard, I think, for nonprofits. It's always a, golly, I hope we'll be here next year. Even All Care, who has continued to tell us that they have, as much intention as they can to continue funding us, they're also, what they get from the state is what they get. So they can only give us what they get. But what we're asking for the city is for the property, and we would be happy to let you know what our budget was and what our plan is for finances and everything. If you tell us what date you need it, we can get it to you. But there's a lot of unknown in the world. That'd be great.
Leah, are there, so you're asking for assistance purchasing the building. Are there improvements that need to be made that you don't have funding for that you would want to be part of this grant? Or are you only asking for purchase assistance?
We are only asking for purchase assistance. We do have other funding to do improvements on the building. It is a bottomless pit of improving that building. It's old and certainly has needs. So, I mean, we wouldn't stop you from giving us operation dollars or funding to, help improve the building, but what we're needing right now is purchase dollars.
Okay. Was there somebody else over here who had a question for Leah? No, not at this time, I guess. Okay, somebody else who had just a council comment or question for staff? Go ahead, Val.
Yeah, I guess my question for staff was, we talked about the grant award and the importance of protection to the cities, and that's when I first spoke up and said, yeah, that's a given to me. I mean, I don't want to just give them a grant for the property and then, and they acknowledge too, I mean, it's a year by year as a nonprofit, but they, if they were to fall apart or whatever, I do think the land should go back to the city. I mean, I just think that's a given. And when you wrote this up under the slide 5 and 6, I think that was kind of expected. And I guess that's what I'm saying, is that I would expect that to be in the grant. And that was my assumption because you brought it to me. I don't know whether we needed to further discuss it or whatever, but my assumption is that you're saying that you will protect the city if something were to happen. I think the city's money, yeah, it's a necessary, and I think they would certainly understand that. So I guess that's where I'm confused. That should be a part of this whole process without having to have another meeting to discuss that.
I think that is what we want to come out of this workshop today, is what parameters are necessary for your approval or consideration. Rob and then Dwayne.
Yeah, I'm thinking the exact same thing, Val, and I don't think that we even have to reinvent the wheel. We basically had a contract essentially in place 3 years ago with All Care that had all those exact concerns and considerations. Precisely, the performance that the city was going to require from All Care, what defined a breach, the length of time that they had to remedy a breach, all those things. We've already done that. And it just turned out at the last minute that it was actually Rogue Retreat had a problem in Medford and wasn't able to partner with All Care and make that happen, I guess. But we had all that worked out, and I'm sure it's, and I didn't see anything that is in today's presentation that's really any different than what we had already worked out 3 years ago. So if we look at that contract, I think all those protections for the city are, I would call them boilerplate. They're common sense, they're boilerplate, and we've already done it. It's already in writing somewhere on somebody's computer.
Dwayne.
My questions, I think, for Brad or the fire chief. Were there housing these many people in that building? And the one's very old, I think has a wooden floor. The other one has cement floor. And would there need to be any things changed? They're going to cost more money for Mint in there due to the amount of people inside there? I mean, this additional cost?
Yeah, so the building is going to have to be reviewed. We're going to have to do a walkthrough, and then we will set occupancy standards, and then we have to review all the systems within it, from the fire alarm to sprinkler systems, everything, to make sure that it is up to par, and that does come at an extensive cost, especially with up-to-date standards.
If I could just add, on the seasonal shelter, there's a little different standards, and the fire marshal, has already done a walkthrough on that. So last year, for example, they put a new rear door in there. So different standards for the the short-term seasonal as compared to a more permanent type shelter.
So is it more? Can you explain what the difference is there, from seasonal to what the requirements are?
If it's a temporary, if there's temporary occupancy, there's different OFC, Oregon Fire Code, there's different standards that we adhere to. Now, if it's a permanent occupancy, then we're more strict with, depending on the materials, from everything from what you live in and building with to the emergency exit requirements to the occupancy load. So there's very different requirements, and we apply those differently for each building, each situation. So I can't give you a blanket statement, unfortunately.
Is there a way to have that building assessed before we make a decision here? That's a lot of money to make a decision that we don't know what the price is without knowing how much it might cost somebody to fix it if it needs to be fixed.
We can certainly have our team go over there and assess it. However, we don't set costs, so they would have to go based off of our recommendations and working with the team. They would have to go out and seek bids and stuff from multiple fire alarm companies and everything that we would require in order for them to get the full cost for that.
Just to clarify, this is not a changed use of what they were already planning to do with that property, as far as I'm aware. Can anybody, well, right now they're operating an emergency warming shelter, but that's not what their plan has been for using that building. Maybe Leah or Cassie could speak to that, that they've been working on getting it operational for the pallet shelters and for a congregate shelter.
Yeah, we're sort of building the plan as we go. I mean, we were just excited to be able to have a warming shelter at first, and then we were able to open navigation, and yeah, we're continuing to develop our plan. But we fully expect to have lots of inspections and have to continue being flexible with what the building needs. Did that answer your question, Mayor?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the time that you moved into that building, you've always been working towards having an ongoing facility that's not just a weather-related shelter. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. So at this point, where you're asking to purchase it, but you're not really changing the plan of what you had intended to do it at the time that you leased it.
That's right.
Okay. Dwayne?
So there's no plan, it seems like. This just keeps it developing, and it's up in the air. I mean, these are her words. I thought we were talking about a shelter, permanent, to get rid of J Street. That's what people have been saying here. And now the plan keeps developing as time might happen with no permanent thing. It just doesn't make sense to me that that's not the plan. I thought everybody was here looking for a permanent thing for 4 or 5 years, whatever. And now every time we ask a question, the plan keeps, well, there might be that. That's where we want to go. Well, I don't want to might something. I want to know what the plan is for a permanent for 5 years. This just doesn't seem like we're rushing something.
Well, when we moved into that shelter, J Street didn't even exist yet. We were still in parks. I mean, we had our first warming almost a year ago now. So we have had dreams. We always dream of being able to shelter folks. We hate the thought of people being in our parks or at J Street or wherever it was. So we just had to remain flexible and bend as we needed as the situation changed. We want to be good partners, and we want to develop the same goals But the world we live in changes, so do our goals sometimes, I guess.
Thank you. Is it a question for Leah?
No, it's
or
not.
just- Okay. I
Well,
think we're-
the pallet shelters are what is the transitional part, and those are outside of the building, correct? So,
Yes. Any shelter we would offer, any navigation service we offer, just our daytime, is the goal is transition. We want people to reach their goals. So I don't know what definition of transitional, would be too rigid for us to stick to.
okay, thank you.
Okay. Did you have something else, Val? Okay. DJ.
So I have this, this business plan document, oh golly, Partnership for Low Barrier Shelter and Urban Campground Initiative.
Yes.
As I understand it, that was designed around the idea for Washington?
Yes, I believe so as well, yes.
Okay, now whereas it demonstrates a business plan and goals and initiatives, which is great, is there anything about this document financially that can be extrapolated to Parker Place, or has that just become a different beast entirely?
I would have to review it myself as well. I'm sorry, I didn't write it, but essentially, operations is definitely a little bit contingent on capacity. So, the building at Washington had a different capacity than what we're going to be able to maybe achieve at Parker's, for example. And I think that Rogue Retreat has really good example for like what per person costs are, and I think that would be very similar probably for what we would use. So I do think that you could probably use that thinking about capacity very similarly.
Sure, and I think this question kind of answers it, but I just want to be explicit here. It demonstrates role definitions and responsibilities for the City of Grants Pass and Mint. And under City of Grants Pass, it talks about financial dollars to support operations defined annually based on need and mutual goals.
Mm-hmm.
So is that goal, role, and responsibility fundamentally different for the idea of Parker's Place?
Well, when we were first approached, we weren't sure whether the city was going to offer operational support.
Sure.
So I think that has changed a little bit as it's
Sure.
become more clear sort of what our need was going to be for our current location.
Okay, that answers that. Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
I think just to help clarify here, because I've been a part of some conversations that the council hasn't, and we've met several times with different nonprofit groups who are working with the homeless or service providers, as well as state officials. And I guess one of the things that becomes clear is that in order to get your full plan and ask for state funding, you need to have a location. That's the first key, and then you can decide how many people, it houses and how many people you can serve, and develop your operational plan around a particular location. And so in that document, I think that you're looking at, that was something that the city had asked Mint to consider a plan for the Washington Morgan site. And so they did, develop a plan for what it would take for that site, but that's something that they created at our request, and it's not necessarily the same as what they're now planning to do at Parker Place, because each location does have different capacity standards and slightly different goals. And I think another thing that's really important that it maybe if those of us who don't work in this field is the difference between emergency shelters and an ongoing shelter. And so what you see in a pop-up winter warming shelter is that it's only open at night, and people have to leave during the day, and that's where you get this situation where you have people standing outside waiting to get in, at 5 o'clock, or kind of loitering, not knowing what to do with themselves during the day because they have to leave during the day, and then the crew kind of cleans everything up and gets ready for the next night. With a transitional housing or ongoing shelter, which has different funding sources available too at the state level, but the transitional housing where people can be in there during the day because it now is their home, right? Then you don't have necessarily that loitering out in the neighborhood, and you can make some rules about, hey, we don't want you doing that in this neighborhood, and if you do those things, sitting outside with the cardboard, sign or whatever, you can't stay here right? And so you do see some different neighborhood behaviors depending on the types of shelter as well. And I think Joel has been waiting for a long time, and then we'll come back to DJ and Dwayne. Joel.
Boy, we're going on forever. We need to cut this short. But, so I really support Val. We need that executive session to look at the purchase of property. Not that we would buy it, but as an example, what happened up in Portland, the city council bought a motel. They all got voted out of office, which is unfortunate or fortunate, depending on what your viewpoint was. The next city council sold the hotel that was supposed to be used for the unsheltered at $1 million loss. And we need to be prudent with our citizens and our budget so that we're not just reacting to a certain owner's asking price. And I respect Mint working with them and negotiating, but we need to protect the city's interest in that. And we need that executive session. The other thing is, I don't know of any city that has had a shelter that didn't have a budget to support it, that have shelters. Whether it's Portland, whether it's, I mean, the big cities have millions, maybe billions of dollars, depending on how big the city is. Medford supports their shelters. And so if before we enter into this, we need to have a business plan and know what that obligation would be, if anything. I don't think it's going to be zero because no city in the city of Oregon has done it that way. It's just truth and reality. It's what we need to do to keep our eyes open as we move forward. And we need to have our business plan as well. And we need to know what the business plan is of our partners so that it works. And it wouldn't be like Medford, 3 years ago, ran out of funding and disbanded and then got it back. What Portland did. So anyway, there's no city that didn't have a budget to support it.
DJ.
Sure. So this is a great document, by the way, as far as plan and everything goes. However, the financials don't jive with a changed plan and a changed vision for a different place. In my opinion, a financial framework and operation plans for the change of plans to ownership of a property, et cetera, would be appropriate. The stickiest of all the wickets, in my opinion, is going to be the appraised value of that property. We need to have that. And if you have it, if you could please share it, that would be great.
We sent it to mayor councilor email about 20 minutes ago, so it should be in your inbox.
It's there. Thank you.
Yes.
Valerie.
I was just going to say it's there. I've got it. I've already read it, so.
Okay, yeah, I guess I'm not sure what's been disclosed publicly, I guess, and what I know privately, but I'm aware of the pricing. Dwayne?
I have to disagree with you, Mayor, about the shelter. Almost 2 years ago, I went and visited Ben and all their shelters and everything, and their shelter, it houses 120 people at the exact same shelter. People live there. They come and go during the day, but they live there. They have all their stuff there. They hang out there. The first thing that the man that took me around said is, all the businesses hate us around here. All of them hate them because of what it brings to the community around them, the businesses, Bi-Mart, everywhere. And last week I was there and I visited again, and guess what? There's tents in the city. There's people sleeping on the sidewalk. So I don't think that your assessment that it's not going to hurt the community around there is right. Everywhere I've come, there was someone being affected. So that's my 2 cents on this.
All the hands up over here. Rick, and then Joel, and then Vanessa.
I would also be in favor of the executive session. I think there's mainly two main issues here is funding for the property, and the other issue is the operational plan, but I think they're 2 separate subjects. Thank you.
Joel.
So I went and talked to the owner of Bi-Mart, and he didn't have any problems. In fact, he was very complimentary and thought that they had bent over backwards, and I even got his the phone number of Bi-Marts in the Northwest. I guess they're only in the Northwest. what they said was it was a vast improvement from what was going on in the park, because people would go from the park to Bi-Mart to keep warm. And there was, and it was a mess. The other thing is, as we move forward with this, if we move forward with this, if we can protect the financial integrity of the city as we move forward with this and go in with our eyes open rather than be surprised by a short-term plan, immediately I think those other 2 campgrounds should be closed down.
Vanessa.
Councillor Pell did make a great point that we have been here before, and I think that the grant language exists when we were working with All Care and Rogue Retreat, and so I think that that would be a really great jumping ground for us to get started on that grant language. And I also do agree of an executive session this Wednesday to discuss that further.
Okay, so as far as the executive session goes, we can really only discuss the financials of the property transaction, right?
That is correct. The rest of it, the services that they would provide, or your expectations in gearing up for the services, et cetera, is open session discussion. Say, for instance, I've heard just now, well, we'd like to close down our 2 sites. Well, if you're looking at what's objectively reasonable from that definition of what the state law is requiring us to do with the time, place, and manner, you would need to coincide the shutting down or the removal of the city-sponsored resting sites to the full operation of the MINTS program, so it's sort of like for like from a service level perspective. Those kind of things might be something that you want to discuss in open session with regards to deliverables of part of the grant program.
Yeah, so far, I've heard, I guess, the kind of caveat that the property would return back to the city, or the value of the property would return back to the city if it were not going to be used in this way. Are there other things that you would want, or questions that you need staff or Mint to be able to answer?
I have to think about it, but
You have to think about it?
nothing comes to mind right now.
Okay, so we're going to
Mayor.
take a look at the previous grant that was written a couple years ago and use that as the starting point. Okay. Somebody? Brian?
Yeah, I think in the previous contract, there were some metrics around timelines and performance, and I would hope that those are going to be, very similar to what we've looked at previously, and that we can adjust those on Wednesday as needed.
As far as timeline goes, Leah, do you know what the anticipated timeline is for when you would have the pallet shelters open, and then when you would be able to do the congregate shelter?
I don't, I'm sorry. There are just a few projects that have to happen first. Like Cassie described, I think we would do it as soon as possible. And I don't think we have any trouble with the city retaining control of the property as long as we're operating there. I don't think Mint would have any objection to something like that, what y'all are discussing. Just wanted to say that as well.
Thank you. Valerie?
Yeah, I have a question for Aaron in talking about, you're right, wanting to shut down J Street or the other, and how they really kind of, hand in hand. If we're going to do that, that's going to be a policy decision, and obviously that policy decision will probably end up in the next year, because whatever. My question is if the future council wants to shut down J Street, will they need to show that there's something else in place for the state? How does that work?
Well, the policy decision of having that coincide with the grant program could be a policy decision of this council if that's what you wanted to include in the grant award project, to where that would be the intent. So you're matching service level to a contribution. Ultimately, we're operating the 2 resting sites. We're going to be operating the 2 resting sites through the calendar year. We haven't received any information from this policy board to the contrary. The new policy board coming on can have those discussions, but ultimately the discussions would center around really objectively reasonable and what your definition is. And each community defines what objectively reasonable is because the state did not provide any hard definitions of what that is. That's one of the things that we're trying to look at changing at the state level. League of Oregon Cities has that as one of our top priorities to try to get some additional clarity from the state on what truly is objectively reasonable, so things can be more defensible. But until that happens, and if it does happen, it's left to the policy boards of each community to determine what that definition is. Did I answer your question?
Not really, because objectively reasonable is kind of a vague
I won't be able to answer that
term.
question.
So it just comes down to, you know, if just closing it and having them go to the mission is considered objectively reasonable.
If this or a future council wants to call that objectively reasonable, it is their prerogative to do so, and it truly is. There is no hard definition of what that is. You try to provide justification for your decisions and move forward in case you need to defend that decision sometime in the future.
Okay, so my question is, and I guess I'm unsure about what you're saying then, that if we wanted to make it a part of a, you know, Parker's Place, putting this in as our objectively reasonable and closing those, we would have to do it. I guess I'm unclear of exactly, say that again, exactly what we would have to do to have that happen.
Well, what I was trying to say, and I don't want to mix your words or thoughts or anything, but you mentioned something about it would need to be the next council and as a policy board to determine on when to shut down our two resting sites, and would there be a correlation with the grant? You can make it a correlation with the grant, or you don't have to. That's all up to council. If you want to have certain performance metrics associated with the dollars that you're providing, you can do so, but that just needs to be defined, and I would just need to have that direction from council. So you can put in there that here's the grant, you're going to get basically, like Councilor Fazer was talking about, there's a business plan that he's looking at. Well, they'll have a business plan, but for Parker Place, that will define success in full operation. And if that's in parallel with what this policy board or future policy board defines as success, success for this policy board might be that we are not owning and operating an unmanaged campground. And if that's success, and if the partnership for that is to provide dollars to provide a permanent location for Mint, then that's the correlation that you can have through the grant. If the policy board here or the future definition of success doesn't have anything to do with whether we operate or not operate a resting site urban campground, then that doesn't have to be part of the grant program, or maybe that's something you address later. But it really truly is, you are the ones with the dollars, you're the ones setting the policy. It's truly what do you want to adhere to for performance standards and expectations in the grant program that you're providing.
Brian.
Pass.
Rob. Nothing? Nothing from either of you? Okay. Anybody else have anything else they wanted to add right now? Okay, so we're going to have staff use the previous grant as kind of a starting point for parameters of a current grant, I guess, and we're going to have an executive session where we will discuss dollar amounts of the property. Brian?
Would it make sense to have that at the beginning of the business meeting?
Seems like it probably would.
Okay.
Otherwise, we'll just have it in the middle, right? Or we'll see. Is it hard on people to do it ahead of time? It's kind of hard on me. Rob?
I guess I'm just a little reluctant to, in some way, tie Mint or any nonprofit to this or future council's ability or decision-making as to whether or not they're going to shut down, J Street or any other location. I mean, it's just, as everybody in this room knows, this is such a complex, interwoven issue, and you know, what we found out with Spalding Industrial Park, what we found out in every possible place, that somewhere in Grants Pass is always in somebody's backyard, right? We know that. And the only way that would change is if a future council were to just close down J Street, and then the homeless wouldn't just be in somebody's backyard, they'd be in everybody's backyard. So and then we've got, you know, if they're in everybody's backyard, what do our city ordinances say about the legality of them, you know, camping on the sidewalk? We already know what the city ordinances say, we wrote them, but the fact is that we also know that we see every day in the newspaper that, you know, someone's been arrested and released 13 times this year, or 10 times this year, 9 times this year. We see that every single week in the newspaper. So this problem, or having people be off our sidewalks and off our public spaces, goes way beyond what the council alone can do. And again, to tie all these things together with somehow, you know, forcing Mint to also be tied to all of that quagmire, I just think is, first of all, I think it's unfair to Mint. I just think it's just a never-ending quagmire. I mean, it's just too many moving pieces that cannot really fit together, that need to be fit together by somebody, somewhere, sometime. But I don't think that this council alone can do it, and I don't think that Mint can do it. And I think that it's really foolish to try to go down that path. I think this needs to be as simple as, and it's not simple, but as simple as possible. You know, does the council want to essentially buy a piece of property for Mint to do their thing? And we also know that that's going to change somewhat as the months and years go by, and to some degree as their funding, like every other nonprofit's funding, goes up and down from year to year. Within that construct, they still have to meet certain minimum standards, otherwise they'd have to give the property back to us. But to have too many moving parts in there, and I just mentioned several of them, not all of them, but to have too many moving parts in there, I think would be unfair and foolish.
Anybody else? Val?
Yeah, I agree. I think we need to keep it as simple as possible and not, yeah, simple.
Joel?
Well, I agree also, and that needs, J Street and the other place need to stand on their own merits. And that doesn't mean that there couldn't be another subject brought up before council and not tie the two together. That makes sense, but it does need to be brought up. One of the things that struck me was just abiding by the state legislature rules probably are reasonably prudent. Well, what the state legislature said was the minimum. That's probably pretty reasonable in terms of defensible before the court. And that's a lot less than what we're providing right now. So that's another option. But we'll have to look at it and see and have it be its own topic. I think that makes sense.
Vanessa?
I also agree that the grant and the J Street should not be intertwined.
Brian?
I would just request that staff could get us a draft of the proposal at least 24 hours before the meeting so council has an opportunity to review.
We can do our best effort, but I don't know if that's deliverable.
I believe in you, Aaron. You can do it.
So I guess,
Valerie?
so my question is then, if we want to talk about the parameters ahead of time, I mean, that's the advantage of having the executive session and having to know about the building helps us to move forward with the parameters of the contract. So the contract would have to be open session. I mean, the parameters would have to be an open desk. So are we saying we're going to put that on the agenda as well?
Well, yeah, I think if you, that would potentially help. You're going to have a document to look at, and you're going to want to maybe discuss or make some changes associated with that. And having a link to the closure of J Street versus this, you can't link the two, but you can have in your contract a definition of success for you providing dollars and your return on your investment. Your return on your investment may be this level of service, and it would be mutually agreed upon that this is our plan for this level of service. Once they meet that level of service, they're complying with the grant agreement, and at that point, as a separate issue, you could say now that they're complying with this, we now have an opportunity to discuss what to do with our resting sites. They're not linked, but you are establishing a definition for success for you as a policy board on what your return on investment is for that property, and in doing so, opening the door for potential options for you to deal with time, place, and manner and objectively reasonable, if that makes sense.
All right. Anything further on this at this time? I think let's plan on doing the executive session beforehand. I don't think it needs to be very long in the sense that we're just discussing some money issues, right? And that the bulk of the discussion needs to happen in open session. Is that?
Yeah, we could do that. Would you like to plan an executive session for 5:30? They would have a hard close date at 6, a hard time at 6, because we would, unless you wanted to change that, or you can have the executive session at 6 o'clock. We would close the executive session when we close, and anybody that's waiting would be waiting outside, and then they can come in. So you could do it 2 ways.
Does 5:30 work for people? Okay. It's what?
Is 30 minutes enough? I mean,
It's all we can talk about is the
You think we
price.
can bang that out in 23 minutes?
All we can talk about is the price of the buildings, what they're asking, and I guess I already know this information, so I don't even need to have the session. Brian?
So we could talk about the valuation of the property. Can we talk about potential funding, or is that open session material?
In the sense, if we were interested in purchasing the property as a city, I think we could talk about some of that.
Okay.
The funding is open session discussion, really. And it's sort of how we've done it before in the past. When we've had executive session for purchase of property, you authorize the purchase of the property. We, as you know, already have seen some of the potential options, but the discussion of where the funding comes from in general is open session discussion.
Anything further? Okay, Brian.
Motion to adjourn?
I think we
Oh, it's too eager.
potentially just need to do a real quick agenda review here. So we do have a meeting coming up on Wednesday. We'll do our executive session at 5:30.
The executive session?
Yeah.
Is a new council and mayor invited to that?
No.
Okay.
They're not currently elected officials. Is that, I mean, past practice, have you ever done that?
Listening to our finance director talking to me about something, what was your
Whether the
question?
newly elected officials would come to a current executive session before they take office?
Ultimately, that's, executive session is council privilege. And if council so desires to provide that opportunity, that's been done in the past, that would be ultimately your call as a council.
I guess, council, you can decide. DJ?
In my experience, we are asked this every turnover, and it's always an issue. And the fact remains is we don't have a new sworn-in council, we have a council-elect, and we're just talking price here.
Joel?
While what DJ says is true, I think it's also important that we have them there. That we have, if they want to come, that they're welcome to come. They don't have to come, but they're going to be making decisions, and they need to know the background, and they need to know the discussion, and they need to know what's going on, and they need to know the different sides, the advantages and disadvantages, and process is a lot of times is much more important than the decision. And if you have a shared process, it makes the decision much easier to get. If you don't have a shared process, you just keep doing it over and over again, which we could do. But that, I don't want to do that. So I would have them come.
Rick?
So the question I have, I think it's good for everybody to be informed, but if they're invited, I think they would expect to participate and be part of that decision. And I guess if they were sitting there listening, I don't have a problem with that status, because they would see what the interaction occurs. What is there? How would that be handled?
Ultimately, it's your meeting, you're the policy board, but it would, unless there is a specific purpose for, like a specialist, say a city attorney or your labor law attorney coming into executive session providing you information as a staff person, I would see that as they would be just observing and not providing contextual input on policy when they are just elected and they're not sitting on the board.
I don't know, does anyone want to make a motion about this? Dwayne?
I move to allow the new incoming council and mayor come to executive session if they choose so as observation only.
Is there a second? Seconded by Joel. Any discussion on that? DJ and then Rob?
I've said no to this every time I've been asked.
Rob?
Yeah, based on the decision that we will be making in the next, potentially next week or two, I see no advantage to the citizens of having to the newly elected at that meeting. I know in the past, I was at an executive session when we were dealing, before I was sworn in, when we were dealing with ongoing litigation that was likely to last several more years. And it made a lot of sense for me to know, and the elected councilors to know what we are likely looking at long-term as we move to the Supreme Court and so on and so forth, because we're going to be dealing with the exact same issue. This is a very focused issue, and I don't necessarily see how the newly elected are going to impact this issue and any votes we may take on Wednesday night or this month, for that matter.
Vanessa?
Yeah, I'll just second that. For this specific topic, I don't see a need.
Okay. Dwayne, you made the...
Just a second. I do.
Okay, Val.
Yeah. I just wanted to say, too, I mean, I think the reality of it is, I think we've all, in these open sessions, have pretty well said how we feel about it. And I think they know how I feel about it. And I've, even during this session, received emails about how they feel about it. And, I mean, they have the right, but I'm sure they're not going to consider what I have to say down the road, whatever. It's just like, I think this is a very, this is kind of the end for a lot of us. And I think it's feeling like we were elected as well. And we were elected for the fourth term to make decisions. And so I feel that's kind of where we're at. And in the future, they'll have the decisions. And I think, you know, in my talking, I've tried to talk about how, we've all talked about protection to the city. I mean, that's important. It's important that we protect the city. I don't think anybody up here doesn't agree with that. And I know those have been some of their concerns. So personally, I mean, I could probably go either way, but I think I feel pretty clear that it's our decision and we need to make that decision on our own.
Joel?
Well, and I agree with what you said, Val, and because they're coming in and observing doesn't mean that they're taking that decision-making authority away from you. You still have that authority.
Okay. Dwayne, you made the motion to allow the council and mayor-elects to come to the executive session on Wednesday and observe only. How do you vote?
Yes.
DJ?
No.
Vanessa?
No.
Rick?
Yes.
Joel?
Yes.
Brian?
No.
Rob?
No.
Valerie?
No.
Motion failed 5-3. All right. Rest of what we have on December 4th. So we have a proclamation regarding a new sister city that we wanted to acknowledge. We have a recognition of a community member. We have a public hearing for CDBG Community Development Block Grants. We have a public hearing regarding the home bridging Grants Pass annexation by consent at 1907 Fruitdale Drive. And then our council action items are a resolution for FEMA's pre-implementation compliance measures, a resolution amending the comprehensive fee schedule. We're going to add in a resolution regarding this grant that you guys can have available. And then our consent calendar items are a resolution adopting the city manager's evaluation, resolutions renewing medical and dental insurance, a resolution awarding Riverside water line replacement, a resolution regarding purchasing SCBA. Does anyone know what that is right off the top of their head? Okay.
Yes, Mayor, that's a self-contained breathing apparatus required for our firefighters to do their job.
Okay, perfect. And URA meeting regarding the resolution to approve the URA's 5-year implementation strategy. And then that last item on there is bumped into January. Any questions about anything for Wednesday? Okay, and then at this point, we do have a workshop and meeting still on the calendar. We will very likely cancel that. I think the items that are on there right now that have been moved to January, but I want you all to just, keep, depending especially on where you are with business regarding Wednesday night. If we feel like we need to have another meeting before the end of the year, then we will do so. And if not, maybe Wednesday will be our last meeting. Anything else? Rob?
Since that may even be our last meeting or whatever, I'm not sure what's going to happen in the agenda setting that's scheduled for December 11th, but I'm scheduled to be on that, and I'm going to be out of town. So if we're actually going to have any kind of agenda meeting and anyone wants that spot, I can't make it.
Okay. Very likely we will not have that meeting, but yeah,
Did you say this Wednesday might be our last meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we still have it on the books for now, and but city staff has been looking. Sometimes there are things that they need approved before the end of the year. In this case, they've taken a look, yeah. So we'll very likely cancel it, or potentially have a meeting on a different date if for some reason we needed to wrap up some loose ends, but probably won't be meeting on December 18th. Anything further for today? All right, Brian, now you're up.
I forgot my motion. I'm just kidding. Motion to adjourn.
Come on, man. Seconded by Rick. All in favor of adjourning today, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody who wants to stay a little longer, say nay.